and gentle nuts.
So, as most of you are probably aware, I usually try my absolute darndest to avoid politics. But this we need to talk about. So, buckle up, kiddies, squirrels going nuclear. During this past election cycle, of the many things that popped up as topics of conversation, the idea of child support from conception, first proposed by Vivek Ramaswamy, is what, in my capacity as an advocate for equality, caught my attention the most. Now called the Unborn Child Support Act, it's been submitted at the federal level and seeks to amend Title 9D of the Social Security Act to ostensibly allow for the collection of child support from the date of conception. A good idea, right? Wrong. It's a horrible idea. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why. First off, let's get this out of the way right now. Disclaimer: despite what it says on the tin, our current child support system is less a noble crusade to make sure little Tommy gets his lunch money or that Susie Q can buy new shoes, and more a government-sponsored extortion scheme where the state gets paid every time they slap a parent, usually dad, but not always, with a bill. Yes, guys, you heard that right. For every dollar of child support a state collects, the federal government reimburses them, therefore incentivizing them to put as many parents on child support orders as humanly possible. The same is true for alimony, but that's an entirely different video. Cue the Unborn Child Support Act, which on the surface appears to be an attempt to financially support women during their pregnancies, but which in reality is just a further example of our government's greed. Of the 13.6 million families in the US with custody arrangements, half of them are on child support orders. But of course, that's not enough. No. The government needs more, because of course they do. And I might not be so vehemently opposed if I wasn't so sure this is just another attempt at a money grab by our friends in Washington. That said, supporters of the bill, including Mr. Ramaswamy, seem largely unaware of the realities of what they're proposing. A Republican who calls himself pro-life, Ramaswamy first introduced the concept of child support from conception as a compromise in the abortion debate. And while I get where he's coming from, there are some flaws in that logic, not least of which is the emphasis on male responsibility without any corresponding emphasis or even recognition of the role women play in the process of conception. I mean, why don't you just come out and say it, Mr. Ramaswamy? You think women are too stupid to know how pregnancy works, and because we're too stupid to know how pregnancy works, that having sex, even with all precautions taken, can still sometimes result in a child, we need men to come bail us out because we're not financially or mentally competent enough to do it ourselves. I can see it now.
That's not what I'm saying at all, Miss Squirrel.
Perhaps not intentionally, but in essence, that's exactly what you're implying. To start, you're infantilizing us in the name of helping, and I honestly don't know which is worse, that you're doing it at all or that you can't see it. I mean, the assumption that a man should bear the full financial burden of a pregnancy, which, accepting the birth, doesn't actually cost all that much, suggests women are incapable of being held accountable for their own reproductive decisions, i.e., too stupid to know how pregnancy works. Shocking though I'm sure it is for you to believe, excepting those who are raped, which is a different conversation, women aren't passive participants in conception. We're just as involved in the act that leads to pregnancy as the guys, so in a world where equality is the goal, responsibility should be shared accordingly. Secondly, and this is of particular note to feminists, it reinforces the idea that women are or should be dependent on men. Yes, folks, you heard that correctly. For once, me and the Blue Hair Brigade are on the same page. Call Ripley's. For decades now, feminism has pushed the narrative that women don't need men to provide for them. Yet apparently when it comes to pregnancy, suddenly we're all damsels in distress in dire need of mandatory financial aid from men, without which we can't possibly be expected to survive. Not to put it too fine a point on it, but that's a pretty insulting contradiction, don't you think? Third, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, it incentivizes irresponsibility. If men are forced to bear the full financial burden alone, it removes the incentive for women to be selective, responsible, or even honest about birth control. This creates an imbalance where one party, the man, has no reproductive rights, while the other, the woman, has all the power and none of the consequences. I swear I made a video on this recently even, didn't I? In conclusion, Mr. Ramaswamy and everyone who supports this particular bill, the argument for male-only financial responsibility ultimately paints women as weak, incapable, and in dire need of paternalistic protection. That's not empowerment, that's regression. Real equality means equal rights, equal choices, and equal responsibilities. Anything less is hypocrisy, which coincidentally brings me to the other half of why this idea is only slightly less horrible than bringing dinosaurs back to life. Sansa, did you want to be part of the video? Did you? Did you want to be part of the video? You did? Oh yes, you need cuddles. Cuddles loves. Oh, here comes Chloe. Cuddle loves. Cuddle loves. Yes, yes. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. What was I talking about? Oh yes, dinosaurs. Bad. There are no safeguards. Seriously, none. No protections for dad. I'm not even kidding. The way it's written now, there are no requirements to verify paternity before subjecting the father to what is essentially financial slavery for, depending on the state, at least 18 years. Talk about incentivizing irresponsibility on the woman's part. Without proof of paternity, you're looking at anchor babies on steroids. I know you think you're somehow culling the need for so many abortions, but what you're actually doing is commercializing motherhood. Oh, you find that hard to believe? Let me explain. Under these proposals, a man could be legally required to provide financial support for months before a paternity test is ever conducted. I mean, paternity fraud is already a much bigger problem than anyone is willing to admit because heaven forbid we acknowledge some women, lie. And no, it's not rare. Depending on the study, estimates suggest that anywhere from 10 to 30% of men paying child support aren't the real biological fathers. That means there are thousands, potentially millions of men out there forking over a good chunk of change every paycheck for a child that isn't theirs. And before anyone whips out the, well, he raised the child so he can keep paying argument, no, absolutely not. That logic is akin to stealing someone's car, letting them drive it around for a few months, and then telling them, well, you got used to it, so it's yours now. So that's paternity fraud. And now we have this on top of it, because apparently we're not making this disastrous system dystopian enough. Under this model, a man would be financially shackled from the moment of conception before paternity is even established, before any proof exists that the child is his. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, I don't know, maybe the fact that some women already lie about bringing on birth control, poke holes in condoms, or outright pick the wrong father to list on the birth certificate when it suits them. If a man is forced to pay before DNA verification, the door to fraud swings wide open, welcoming in a new era of legally sanctioned extortion. But wait, it gets worse. The cherry on top of this particular fraudulent sundae is once a man's on the hook for child support, it's notoriously difficult, if not outright impossible, to get off, even if DNA later proves he's not the father, because in the eyes of the law, fairness takes a backseat to best interests of the child. Translation, too bad, pay up. So if conception-based child support becomes the norm, we're looking at a system where men can be financially enslaved to a child they never fathered from a pregnancy they had no control over, while the state happily pockets its cut of the money and the mother gets off scot-free. Dress it up however you like, what you're essentially advocating for is the ability to turn men into ATMs, giving women all the power but none of the responsibility in child-making, while enabling fraud on a scale that would make Charles Ponzi cream his pants. It's not equality, it's not justice, it's theft wrapped in a baby blanket. But, let's pretend for a moment it does go through, and John Deere sleeps with Jane Doe, who finds out 3 weeks later she's pregnant. Now John's on the hook for child support, which he dutifully pays, only to find out 9 months later, little Bambi's not his. There isn't a legislative body on the planet that's going to make a struggling single mother pay back a dime of child support after it comes out she was mistaken as to who the father was. Even if she lied on purpose because John Deere makes better money than Mr. Rudolph, whose only gig happens to be seasonal, it would be incredibly difficult to prove. So to recap, Mom gets away with no repercussions while Mr. Deere is on the hook for thousands of dollars he has no legal means to recover. This particular reality would be especially unjust in lower income communities where financial hardship is already a significant concern. No other area of law allows for financial obligation to be assigned without verification. I mean, can you imagine a scenario where someone is forced to pay rent on a house they may not even own simply because another person said they did? In addition to being deemed unconstitutional and an infringement on due process, assuming it even made to court, the judge would laugh it out of his courtroom faster than a rabbit on a freight train. All that said, there is a solution. If Mr. Ramaswamy and his constituents are really as serious about this as they claim, they need to write a bill that actually does what it claims to do instead of trying to sell us on this proverbial Trojan horse. And it's simple. Mandatory paternity tests. For these bills to be equatable, they must require paternity testing as early as medically feasible, typically through non-invasive paternal testing, which can be conducted as early as 7 weeks into a pregnancy with no risk to the mother or child. Implementing this safeguard ensures only biological fathers are held financially responsible, men are protected from fraudulent or mistaken claims, and the law maintains integrity and due process rather than operating on assumption. It is the duty of every legislator to craft laws that are not only fair, enforceable, and constitutionally sound, but are also reflect a commitment to justice and accountability for all parties involved. Requiring paternity testing as a prerequisite for conception based child support isn't merely a legal necessity, it's a moral imperative. Not just for men, but women as well. After all, a deadbeat can't exactly skip out on child support if he's confirmed as the father early in the process. In fact, this proactive approach protects everyone involved. It protects the innocent from being unfairly burdened by a child they didn't conceive, while ensuring that true fathers are held accountable from the start. Without this basic safeguard, we're opening the floodgates for fraud, confusion, and injustice. It's simple. Fairness begins with the truth, and the truth starts with the DNA test. Well, guys, that's it. That's all she wrote. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And for more acorns of wisdom, be sure to check out my podcast channel, Boy Meets Squirrel, linked in the description box below. Now go forth, my nuts, do good, and I'll see y'all later.